Iran and Syria have signed a deal for military cooperation in a meeting between the Iranian Defense Minister, the Syrian President and senior military officials in Damascus. Now, the deal is being seen as a step towards the reconstruction of Syria and a return home for many of the migrants who have been pouring out of the country over the past 5 years. But what becomes of Russia and Turkey as the Syrian Arab Army nears Idlib? And when it comes to reconstruction, is the UN friend or foe? Well, to discuss these issues and plenty more, I'm joined in the studio by Hua Liming, China's former ambassador to Iran, and Aina Tangen, a current affairs commentator. We'll also hopefully be joined by Gamba Naderi, a columnist with Kayan International from Iran, Maher Javadanfar, a Middle East analyst in Tel Aviv, who's standing by for us, and Mark Sloboda is hoping to join us later in the programme. He's a Moscow-based international affairs and security analyst. Those are our topics. This is Dialogue. I'm Jeff Moody. So let's start off with you, if I may, Aina Tangen, talking about this deal today, or the beginnings of this deal between Iran and Syria. We don't know many details about this. The details are very sketchy at the moment, don't we? We know that it's something to do with the military. We know that they're going to help rebuild the military. Do we know any more than that? Actually, we don't. It hasn't been, sketched out in any kind of real terms. What we're really talking about is Iran filling in, making it very clear that they oppose U.S. interests in that area. It'll be very interesting to see. Now, neither one of them has any money. I mean, they're both broke. Iran is facing intensified sanctions. They're fighting for their economic life. And obviously, Syria has been devastated, and they're in negative growth numbers for quite some time. So the signing of this, they were already quite close. Hezbollah has been, which is a client of Iran, has been very much involved. This will be seen by Donald Trump as a kind of red flag to the bull. Expect tweets and charging in, lots of rhetoric to be coming from the U.S. Well, yes, of course, we have to say, why now? I mean, Iran is, as we speak, involved in this law case with the United States at the International Court of Justice, trying to get these sanctions reversed, going around the world, talking to all the allies of the 2015 nuclear accord to try and keep it going. Why is it now, at this very moment, that it is turning to Syria for support? Well, first off, they're simply formalizing something that was already in existence. We already know that senior Iranian army and special forces were helping plan and coordinate the attacks and help the Assad regime stay in power. That has not been hidden. I think it's quite simply Iran has no reason not to do this at this point. The U.S. is not going to let up in any way, shape, or form. Donald Trump is making it clear that he may even be looking at some sort of military options, in which case they want to appear as large as possible. Hua Liming, any country's involvement with Syria has to be treated with caution, doesn't it? From the outside, from the outset here, the whole Syrian conflict has been mired with other conflict, proxy wars being played out, countries trying to impose their own doctrines and beliefs on the country, who should be in charge of the country, etc., etc. What do you think Iran's motives are here?
It's Syrian civil war. From the very beginning, it was 2011 when we know that the spring of Arab. People just thought that was anti-government demonstrations. But later on, it became a proxy war, and it lasted for 7 years. And actually now has nothing to do with domestic problems of Syria. It's the war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's the war between Iran and Israel. And even now, there's a war between U.S. and Iran. So the Syrian becomes a problem between the big powers, between the regional powers. It's very difficult to solve. And now, again, the regime change is still put on the table, because Bashar-Assad still is the president. And from the very beginning, people like President of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, United States, and all the Western countries, they asked Bashar-Assad to step down. But now, how can they deal with that? This is the problem in Syria.
Let's bring in Mir Javadanfar, who's in Tel Aviv for us. Now, we haven't yet talked about Israel's role, but the West and Israel wanted Bashar al-Assad gone, but he just isn't going. It's very clear that he's here to stay, that there's no chance that he's going anywhere. Regime change that the Israelis and the West wanted just hasn't happened, has it?
Well, Jeff, if I may, before answering that, I'd like to answer your previous questions. Why now? Why Iran and Syria talking about a joint defense pact? It's because the Iranians are very worried by the recent statement where President Putin apparently told President Trump that he wants Iran removed from Syria. He says, I don't have the power to do it, but that's my intention. And when you have put that next to the statements by John Bolton, who was in Israel for 3 weeks, who also emphasized that America also wants Iran removed from Syria, Iran is concerned. And the foreign ministry spokesperson in Tehran said recently, no third country will tell us what to do. So by strengthening relations with Syria, the Iranians are telling the Russians, the Israelis, the Americans, only Basharal-Assad is allowed to tell us what to do in Syria, and no one else. In terms of regime change in Syria, at the beginning of this uprising in 2011, there were a group of unarmed civilians from Syria who wanted to overthrow the Bashar-al-Assad regime. And then, of course, as Ambassador Hua absolutely rightly corrected, it turned into a proxy war between the major powers. Although I'd like to add one country whose name wasn't mentioned, that's also Russia, who is also a major player. I think in Israel, the issue of regime change has basically no longer exists. Israel is willing to live with Assad already, but the problem is the presence of Iranian forces on Syrian territory.
Gamba Naderi, columnist with the Kayan International, you've heard it there. You need to get out of Syria right now. What do you say to that?
Well, Jeff, that's not just the demands by the United States or Israel. Even as your distinguished guest in Tel Aviv said, even Russia is asking us to leave. But we didn't go to Syria on our own terms. We were asked to help Syria to fight foreign-backed terrorist groups, and we did just that. We helped the Syrian government in cooperation with Russia to flush out the foreign-backed terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, from this war-torn country when the whole international community turned its back on the people of Syria. The war killed more than 500,000 people, made more than 12 million people homeless, and who was there except the Iranian government forces and of course Lebanese Hezbollah forces. Now they want us to leave. That is not up to them, that is up to the Syrian government. They don't trust Saudi Arabia, they don't trust Russia, they don't trust Israel, and there is some misunderstanding here. Iran did not go there to attack Israel. Iran only went there to fight terrorist groups, and it has managed to do just that. Iran wants the situation to stay the same. Iran is not posing any threat to any country, and if the Syrian government asks us to leave, we will do that by all means, because people here are fed up with war. They don't want us to spend money on Iraq and Syria wars. They want us to spend it here for our own economy because of the situation, as you know better than anyone else, that we have a serious economic downturn here. They blame the wars for what is going on here, the economic hardship. So by all means, people will welcome if Iran leaves Syria, but we will do that when the time is right and the place is safe and the Syrian government asks us.
Mir Javadanfar in Tel Aviv, do you believe that they're no threat, Iran's no threat, they will leave the country as they're asked to, when they're asked to, with no problems?
First of all, I would say, look, I would like to believe that in theory, but in practice we've heard statements. For example, Muhammad Ali Jafari, the head of the IRGC, said, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago, that we will not finish the job in Syria until we've taken care of Israel. He said it at a funeral of one of the Iranian fighters who was killed in Syria. Look, when you put that next to the statements, every year they have these demonstrations, Quds Day demonstrations in Iran, which call for the destruction of the state of Israel. When you have the Hezbollah missiles in Lebanon, but also presence of Iranian forces in Syria, you cannot feel anything but being threatened. I'm sure the people of Iran want to live in peace with everybody, but it, you know, and there are serious, as Mr. Gambari said, there are serious calls for reform. Mr. Karbaschi, who was the former mayor of Tehran recently, last year he criticized the way Bashar-Assad is being helped with weapons from Iran, and now he's been condemned to 1 year in jail because in Iran the authorities know that the war in Syria is unpopular. What we need at the very least are some serious reforms in terms of the presence of Iranian forces in Syria, in terms of the weapons they carry, in terms of their position vis-a-vis the Israeli border. And look, if they want to be in Syria to make business, that's understandable. That's their business. But when, you know, under the current circumstances, with the rhetoric that comes from Tehran, not from President Rouhani, but from the other parts of the ruling system, and also when you look at the you know, reports of the weapons that the Iranian forces and pro-Iranian forces carry, not just Netanyahu, but left-wing governments in Israel would find their presence very, very problematic.
Okay, I want to bring in Mark Sloboda, who's a Moscow-based international affairs.
Before, can I just jump into this? Listen,
yes,
I talked to the
briefly,
deputy foreign minister of this country behind closed doors. He said that it is not up to the military personnel decide what we are going to do in Syria. It is up to the Iranian government and the leadership. As I said, we don't want to stay in Syria. We don't want to attack Israel. We pose no threat to any country, to Syria's neighbors. And as soon as they ask us to leave, we will leave. The problem is that there are so many voices that the international community hears from Iran. That is fine, but they do not represent the foreign policy of this country.
But as usual, it's a case of other countries getting involved in Syria and almost taking away the attention that really needs to be focused on the problem itself in Syria and the humanitarian crisis. So I want to bring in now, if I may, Mark Sloboda, who's a Moscow-based international affairs and security analyst. Vladimir Putin has been saying that he wants other countries, particularly European countries, to get involved right now in rebuilding Syria so that the migrants can come home. Do you think they're ready to come home? The country's still technically at war, isn't it?
There has been a significant movement of people who have been displaced, both internally and externally, already coming back to some areas of the country that have long been liberated. Of course, this does not mean that everyone is right now, at this current moment, is willing to or able or willing to come home. But this is more of a political message to the European powers. In a way, this should actually be seen as asking them to pay reparations for what they have done to Syria. We're talking all of the Western powers, and certainly we have to consider the dictator allies, Saudi Arabia and Qatar as well. The damage that they have inflicted on the country by waging an illegal proxy war for 7 years, trying to overthrow the Syrian government, has done immense damage to the country. And I think this political message to the European powers that the war is over, that you have lost, and that now, in order to stabilize the region and in order to stabilize your own political system, it's time to end the war and think about how we rebuild Syria so that the refugees can indeed one day come home.
Mark, I don't think anybody's disputing that rebuilding this Syria needs to be on the top of people's agenda. I think what I'm disputing is that the war isn't technically over, that the situation in Syria is far from ideal for these migrants to be coming back. Russia has accused Western nations as well of blocking UN aid for Syria's reconstruction and trying to prevent the return of refugees. Is that something that you see? I mean, the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, accused the UN of blocking any UN-affiliated agency from participating in the rebuilding of Syria. Is that how you see it?
No, I don't think that is quite how I see it at all. There has been a return. I think you are correct that the war is not over. I mean, obviously the entirety of Idlib province is literally under the control of al-Qaeda and their allies. I mean, that is a threat not just to Syria, but to the entire world. A huge chunk of a state is currently controlled on the ground by al-Qaeda and their allies. And this is something that all the rest of the industry needs to do. But this is what we're facing in Idlib. But also there is a huge portion of Syria adjacent to that, occupied by the Turkish regime, which continues to supply the jihadists next door in Idlib. And then the United States and its proxies occupy huge swaths of East Syria. Now, these aren't the most populated areas of Syria, but obviously, until all of Syria is liberated, we can't even begin to talk about rebuilding the country. And there will always be a number of refugees who can't return home. These are not the most populated areas of Syria. But until that happens, until all of the invading forces, be they American, Turkish, jihadists, leave and or surrender, then of course we keep talking war.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. Mark Sloboda there, thank you. Aina Tangen in the studio. Is it right then and fair to be talking, as Russia is, about migrants returning to Syria at this stage? I mean, many of them have settled in the West. Many of them are finding themselves putting their children through school. They may have found work. They may be learning their respective languages. They may be settling down into a new home with friends, with contacts, etc. Is it right at this early stage for Russia to be saying, come on, back home, war's over?
Well, I don't think it's Russia's role to be doing that, and given their participation in this, I don't think it's necessary, even a moral thing. I mean, there have been Russian jets and things like that. And here's the problem. It goes back to this proxy war thing that you said, exactly. And when you pull on any one of the strings, if you pull on the U.S. string, you're connected to the illegal bases that we've set up in Syria, our support, arming the CIA, arming quote, what we call freedom fighters and things like that, and then you go back to the Kurds. So we have very complex. You pull on the Russian, they also have bases there. They're supporting this for themselves. If Iran is out of the equation, what does it leave? It means that, in essence, Assad is a client state of Russia because he needs weapons, he needs money. Problem is, Russia doesn't have money. So Russia is now coming forward and saying, oh, gee, wouldn't it be nice if the Europeans, who we're not getting along with very well and impose sanctions on us, would pay for all of this stuff, kind of blithely ignoring the fact that, this kind of things happen. There are no good actors here, and that's a problem. And Bashar al-Assad has, in essence, lost it. He doesn't have the money or an army to do anything independently. He's trying desperately to play off the major factions who are involved in his country in order to keep himself in power. Going against this is everything else that was been mentioned by everybody here. It's just you don't see an end to this problem cleanly. And as far as the Syrian refugees abroad, it is horrible. But the lesson here should be learned that, yes, we have to do something about that, but it should never have started. This kind of embracing of the Arab Spring was wrong. It was naive. And it has led to 500,000 people being killed, 1 million being injured, and 12 million being displaced just in Syria. And we don't have to talk about any other area. So we're not
even talking about Yemen.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something goes back. China says we don't get involved in the internal affairs. And sometimes that can seem like it's a cop-out because you're saying, oh, thanks. But the problem is, once you get involved, you start opening up Pandora's box, and you do not know the consequences, not for your country, and certainly not for the country that you're interfering with.
Very much so. Hua Liming, the cost of rebuilding the country, they say, is estimated at $388 billion US. And of course, we've got disparate factors who are disagreeing over who should get involved with that cost. Should the West get involved, considering their view on Assad? Should Turkey get involved, considering the devaluation of the lira? Where do we go from here? Of course, one answer, the answer that's almost staring us in the face, is that Syria is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the easy answer here is for China to step in, for China to get involved and to envelop Syria in the Belt and Road Initiative and the comfort that comes from being part of that club, if you like, and rebuild the country?
I think no single country can afford such big amounts of rebuilding and reconstruction. But I would say China has rich experience to reconstructions in the warring country. Countries like Afghanistan, like Iraq, immediately after the war, after 2002, Chinese companies were into Afghanistan, and they are doing well, of course, with big risks. Not exactly meaning that China is giving the money, is providing the money. China has plenty of the experience to do something, to constructing, to infrastructure in very hard conditions like Afghanistan. And Iraq, China is doing well. I think if China is asked to join the reconstruction, I think China will be very happy. China's role, I think, is one is peacemaker, the other is rebuilding and reconstructor.
Let me just add in, when you say it's a club, it's not, this isn't a ticket to a club where you get unlimited. The whole thing about the Belt and Road is its physical connectivity to markets. Okay, so you don't, and this is part of the thing, a lot of people look at isolated countries and they say, oh, you put a big port there. That little country can never afford that port. It can't unless that port is connected up to a worldwide system of other ports, other roads, other areas which are now going towards trade. The difficulty with Syria at this point is it's not a major, it would be a major aid, for aid, yes, but not trade. And that's the difficulty. So you couldn't afford to go through the process of saying, how are we going to get a return on this if this is in fact going to be a main area? Where would that road go to? To Israel? You tell me.
But it's not just physical roads, though. It's connectivity in all sorts of ways, making up the Belt and Road Initiative. We're talking about Wi-Fi. We're talking about connecting in all sorts of 21st century ways, not just a physical road.
Yes, but you can't. I can't send you know, this piece of paper over the over the internet. There's actually
you can scan it and send it.
You can scan it, but if it's fruit, I can't eat it. Okay. My point being that there is a certain things. They need to have jobs. And those jobs are not going to come because they have Wi-Fi, all right? They're going to come because they need roads. I mean, everything's been shattered. They need concrete, glass, aluminum, all of the things that Donald Trump has declared a trade war against because it's against national security of the U.S. So once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of this thing, there has to be some reason. China, nor any other nation, can afford to just start throwing money because there's a humanitarian aid. Those who started it, where is the U.S. in this, all right? Where are the groups that were egging on the whole Arab Spring? Where are the people who were involved in the bombings and arming of these different factions? Why aren't they at the table saying, yes, we were part of this, we need to solve it?
Kamban Aderi, columnist with Cayenne International, does it feel to you that Syria has been abandoned, as we've just been hearing now from Aina Tangan, that all of these people that were very, very vocal in the beginning are now very absent when it comes to aid and rebuilding the country?
Well, absolutely. This is all about hit and run foreign policy. The United States has turned many prosperous countries in the region into failed states. That includes Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and of course Libya. And now they want to pack up and leave. No, I don't think that is going to be the case. They should be held to account, and they should take some responsibility, and they should cough up part of the money, and they should be part of the reconstruction efforts by the international community in order to rebuild from scratch countries like Syria, Iraq, and of course Yemen and Libya. Yes, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative is a lucrative offer from China, and that should be also involved in the reconstruction process. But this shouldn't be the only one. We shouldn't put a lot of burden on the Chinese government, because China did not turn Syria into a failed state. It was a host of other countries in the region and beyond, and that tried to export their so-called democracy and freedom to that that country, and the only thing that they left behind was devastation, terrorism, and more than 12 million people homeless, more than 500,000 dead, and more than 1 million injured. So under international law and the international humanitarian law, the United States and its cohorts, the cronies, they should take part of the blame, they should cough up part of the money, and they should be directly involved in the reconstruction process, because they are responsible for what has happened on the ground. We shouldn't just ask China or Russia or Iran to be part of the reconstruction efforts. Jeff.
Mayor Javadanfar, what do you think of that? He's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, I don't think America... Well, I think everybody should contribute, but I think first and foremost, my respected colleague in the studio quite rightly said about the Syrian people. How are we going to pay money for whom exactly? For what? President Basharal-Assad, if you were a Syrian right now living in Germany, would you want to go back to live in Syria under Basharal-Assad, who has killed apparently something like 200,000 of his own people? He has used chemical weapons against his own people. Something like 30,000 people were tortured, and a great number were killed inside Syria's prisons. Would you want to go and live under such a regime to reconstruct Syria? And also, why should other countries pay for Syria when Bashar al-Assad is in power? I think a lot of these other countries, I agree that they have their own geostrategic interests, but please, ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget the fact that this whole uprising was started by unarmed civilians in Syria, in the province of Daraa, who wanted nothing else but freedom in their own country and not to be oppressed by Bashar al-Assad. And Bashar al-Assad, for something between 3 to 6 months, used weapons, including helicopter gunships, against them. I think the issue here is the Syrian people, to find stability so that we can invest money, so we can have Belt and Road initiatives, or we can have other foreign countries invest in Syria. First and foremost, we need to have the buy-in of the Syrian people in their own country, and that will only happen when they can elect their own leader, be it Bashar al-Assad or anybody else.
Okay, very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Hua Liming, one for you. So he was saying there that why should other countries get involved in helping Syria when they didn't cause the problem and they don't want Bashar al-Assad there in the first place? Is there a moral view for going into Syria and helping them out, even though they don't agree with what's happened there?
China would not agree to have a regime change in the sovereign state from outside. This doesn't mean that China agree or to have the positive position for one regime. But China is defending the principle that no regime should be toppled or changed from outside. This is China's position. So what is happening, this is a civil problem with Syria. Now, unfortunately, for 8 years, it has become the war of proxies. All the big powers and the regional powers has been involved in this the Syrian territory. That's very unfortunate.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Gentlemen, we're out of time. Hua Liming, China's former ambassador to Iran, thank you very much for coming in. Aina Tangen too. And our guests, out and about, Gambana Dairy, columnist with the Kayan International, and Maya Javadanfar, and of course Mark Sloboda, who joined us from Moscow. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in this discussion. And that's it from Dialogue from today, from me and the team here at CGTN. Bye-bye. Thank you for your company.